people on the left need to see this. The true Democrats, and there are patriotic Democrats out there, and they need to see this because you need to come to the Trump train as well. You can hate him all you want, but you need to get over here if you want to hold fast to America. Okay, from here, how do we frame all this? How did we get to this place? Like, what is going on? And I think there's something that people need. I think if you'd have tried to talk about this 10 years ago, people would have went, I'm not looking into that. I'm not paying attention to that. Like, that's not worth my time. I don't have time to go spend there. But I think now we've gotten to a place where we see society the way it is. We see the issues going on in society. We need to at least recognize how we've been taught or indoctrinated to vote on both sides. On both sides. We have been taught to vote by issue voting and identity politics. We have been taught this because this is not how people have traditionally voted in the past, right? Even if you go back through past presidential debates, there was a lot of policy discussion, right? Because policy matters. Policy is all that matters. We've been touching on, right? I don't care if you're a moral president. I do care if you have a morality about you, if you're grounded somewhere. And the reason I care about that, let me say, the reason I care about that, the reason the Christian Judeo framework matters is because you have something undergirding your decisions, or you have something above you that you recognize as bigger than you, that you are adhering to protect your neighbor. It keeps you from going next door and stealing your neighbor's goods or taking out your neighbor because it's in your best interest. Love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's important to, I feel like Mike Pence with a fly. That's important to understand of why these undergirding principles matter, right? Because if they don't, what else is keeping someone from loving their neighbor while in office? And as a president, your neighbor is the American people. Not the Christian, the American people. That's your neighbor. And you've been elected to represent them and to protect them domestically and foreignly I don't think that's a word, and foreign from any sort of a threat, right? And you're there to serve people. And that's the problem with lifetime politicians. We're not going to go there, but lifetime politicians is they eventually start serving themselves instead of the American people, right? So, because we don't talk about policy anymore, and with all the things that are going on, I think there's something that now people might be a little bit more open to. I've been studying this for 10 plus years. I think there's so much to it. I think there's a paper trail of it. We're going to talk about that paper trail. We're going to talk about the evidence and that the long march through the institutions and of cultural Marxism. And we want to kind of dive into that because I think we can connect a lot of dots of where we are based upon cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism versus political Marxism, which Karl Marx was a political Marxist, right? He wanted a political revolution, a workers of the world unite against capitalism, against their countries coming together in this sort of communistic regime. It didn't work for him, right? It kind of failed because World War I begins. And, what he found out was he was in this kind of disillusionment of the fact that people weren't patriotic, that they didn't love God, that they didn't love their families, that they wanted to give up their stuff, right? That people would collectively come together rather than being individuals, right? That it was about collectivism rather than individualism. And what he realized was Western society was steeped in individualism. They were steeped in the idea of God, in the idea of family, and the idea of country, right? And he so underestimated that it didn't work. And so when World War I broke out, it kind of fell apart. But on the backside of World War II, you had his followers come about. And
a lot of this is being carried out
right
by his disciples.
That's right. It's
people
his
who believe in his philosophy.
His disciples who start the Frankfurt School in Germany. If you want to go, it was a social research institution, right? Becomes the Frankfurt School. Go look at it for yourself. We're not going to get too deep into that because that's what's happening in Germany. But then World War II breaks out and they flee Germany from World War II because Hitler's in power. And they flee Germany and they come over to, with embracing arms, let me say, Columbia University in New York City, right? And they start their kind of shtick there. And what his disciples learned was that for Marxism to work, it can't be a political revolution. It has to be a cultural revolution. And the reason is you have to take, this is what it says, this is the basically the theme quote, a long march through the institutions, right? You need a long march through the institutions. And what that means is we have to work our way culturally through the institutions to destroy the idea of God, family, and patriotism. And the reason is because if you get rid of God, what becomes God? Government does. If you get rid of family, what becomes family? Government does, right? Government becomes your safety net, right? The thing in which you'll turn to, the thing in which you'll vote policy into to broaden the government so that they have more money to give out, right? But the problem with that is when you broaden the government, if they have enough power to give you stuff, they also have enough power to take away from you. And then finally, patriotism, right? If you eliminate patriotism, then you're loyal to no one, right? Not even your neighbor. Now there's no social fabric that's holding us together as a country anymore. So our neighbor could become our enemy overnight because we don't care anymore. And they knew these were the things that you had to tear down. And and I think it's Antonio Gramsci is how you say his last name. The Prison Notebook. That's their playbook in a lot of ways. He wrote this in prison, which is why it's called the Prison Notebook. But he is in the book saying we have to tear down the Judeo-Christian framework. Communism can never work in that framework. We have to get rid of it. And the way we get rid of it is, it's always been in the intellectual community, right? This idea of communism, because it isolates power at the top, right? And it enslaves the people. So the intellectual community has always loved this idea and always wanted this idea because it not only gets them in power, but it keeps them in power, right? And so all the prosperity of a country goes to the top echelon, the top elites, right? So it's always been there, but they recognize here's a way we could start to funnel it through society. Let's use the colleges. We have to get it into the mind of the young people. And so you start to see that. We have to get it into the churches, into the seminaries, into the colleges, into the schools, right? And you're taking this long march of indoctrination in this cultural Marxist view of the world so that when you start to present policies, you can actually win over that group of people. And you started to see this in the 60s with the baby boomers, right? A drug-addicted baby boomer group that started to embrace some of this stuff. But even if you can't get everybody on board, what must you also do? You must make voting about identity politics and issue voting. Because if I can make it about that, even if I can't get you to buy into these policies because you might still have a framework of a Christian ideology, and so you would reject these policies because they wouldn't line up with you, that's fine. I can take it to issue voting and identity politics so that you're not really paying attention to my policies anyways. And so there is this long march to where we have actually become two different parties. And the reason I'm bringing this up is people need to understand the party of the left, the Democratic establishment that you're seeing right now. And we're not making this about Democrat Republic. It's not about that. We've said that 100 times. I hated the Bushes. Dustin hated the Bushes. We're not fans of the Bushes. They were red, red, red. Texas, Texas, Texas. Cowboy hat. Here we go. We're not Bush fans, right? Not one nor two. But what we're trying to point out is we have now, it used to be that, who's giving us limited taxes? That's who we're voting for, right? It was a tax battle. And it was a tax battle because, the conservatives saw that as the expansion of government. The liberals were okay with the expansion of government because they thought government had our best interest in mind. And therefore, they were going to distribute the money that we gave them justly or, in a good way. But we've never trusted the government on the right. We're like, give me my money. I'll distribute it to my society and my community. So that was usually the battle for the most part. It was over taxes. But now the Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party of the past. I mean, you are seeing a radical party, a separation happening there. And people on the left need to see this. The true Democrats, and there are patriotic Democrats out there. And they need to see this because you need to come to the Trump train as well. You can hate him all you want, but you need to get over here if you want to hold fast to America, because this is a cultural Marxist battle. This is a war of two countries in one. And this country over here, the Biden train, is a cultural Marxist movement. It is. It has been the setup all the way to this point. And we're going to go in detail about this. We're just setting this up, but we're going to actually show you this. I don't expect you to just receive this because I'm making some broad brush over this entire thing. I'm not just saying, I'm not painting this broad brush and expecting you to just go, oh yeah, cultural Marxism, that's what it is. We're going to walk through it. We're going to show you how the sexual revolution played into it, how the destruction of the nuclear family and the position of the father plays into it through entertainment. We're going to talk about all these things in the weeks to come. But this is what the election is about.
It is, and in that view of a bigger picture, seeing the real issue, like you were just saying, but just to restate it, this election, but just this moment in history and the tension between kind of these various parties, but these forces in society and whatnot. It is a battle for America and our future, but humanity even, because what ideally America, the United States of America, our Declaration of Independence and Constitution taken together, the trajectory of our nation through history and what it's meant kind of on the world stage and what it's meant to all of humanity as people look to the United States for hope and in their greatest aspirations to have opportunity and freedom to pursue their own dreams and the betterment of their family and future generations. I mean, that's a human desire, and thankfully, by God's grace, we were able to codify and institute it here in the United States in the formation of our government. And those who have been against that are throughout history, before the United States and since, are those who want power for themselves. And it has to do with their worldview and some people, and it kind of like when you're talking about the elite, the cultural elite, the elite of our society, whatever position they might occupy in business, in the media, in politics, but their worldview considers themselves superior.
Yes.
And the masses of people as inferior and just kind of
as means of production.
Yeah.
To get them what they desire.
Yeah. The irony of ironies is that socialism, communism is actually the rhetoric around doing it all for the common man, the worker, the average person, just equalizing, democratizing all the resources and power and influence to all the people. It actually is an illusion, a deception, a lie to make you feel good about the idea. But while they lure you into it and get you to give them all their power, but there's got to be, well, somebody at the top's got to be the leader and make the decision. You can trust us to do it for you. And as you do that, then those who are power hungry, they position themselves to take in all that power and wealth. And then once they're there, then we have to maintain this and we have to keep it orderly because some people are going to rise up and they're just not going to want to accept this. So, trust us to keep everything equal. And then, before you know it, you got your tyrants and dictators. That's played out multiple times in
throughout
history. Every instance, basically. If the plan fails and and information starts to get out about the plan, then the last line of defense is we must divide as fast as possible, divide the society that is united through any means possible so that hopefully they'll destroy each other, reduce that population down to a controllable size again so that we can re-reign back over them all over again, right? And that's what you're seeing. Yeah.
They're hoping, what people need to understand, they are hoping for a war. That is their goal. That is their end goal. They are hoping for a war in this country or a willful surrender.
Yeah,
by laying that. Well, they would. Well, that's why they're hoping for a war, because they're starting to see there's a side that's unwilling to surrender. But they would rather us all lay down our guns and give them to them and just trust them as the ones who are going to go out and make sure that justice is done in the world.
And they're more afraid of the inevitability of a war because they, at this point too, they actually wanted this to play out a little slower, I'd say, even over the next 8 years under Hillary, or the next 4, but 4 years under Hillary and 4 more. And they had taken it a different direction, but because people are waking up and they can't control it, then that makes it more tense. And they're trying to use the threat of a war, I think, to manipulate and control people farther, because actually they don't have the strength in numbers.
Yeah.
They control the media, which is powerful because it can give the illusion and the impression of power and strength, but they actually don't have it. It's a lie. It's a facade. They don't have the numbers in the population. Yet. They might if they were able to.
If it plays out another 8 to 12 years and you constantly tell people, look at all the gun violence, the Second Amendment, it's not good.
They would have. Yeah,
right.
It was that's what they were trying to do. I think it's already unless we just all of a sudden cave, or whatever. And
12 years, I'd be 44. That'd be tough to fight still at that point.
But I don't think at this point there's no way it's going to play out the way that they had hoped. And that's by God's grace. And that really just points to the greater issue, because it's not actually about communism or a system of government. It is ultimately fascist, but even beyond that, there's a spiritual reality that governs it all. And that's the only way it actually makes sense. If you see, because why would these people even dedicate themselves? I mean, I guess it's some ambitious and some idealized vision of a future that they hope to see, but why would they commit to it for across multiple generations, a result that they might not even see in their lifetime? How is it that, kind of the conspiracy element of it works over a longer period of time if one generation is going to die off? Well, it's because like we who have a different moral framework, and we are willing to, in ways, sacrifice for that greater good or the greater goal of the future of our families and our children and humanity. They too, in some way, are committed to a higher goal. Yeah. But I would say that in the end, it might be misguided. Maybe a lot of them aren't doing this like directly, intentionally, willfully, but behind it all is Satan.
Yeah.
And Satan is driving this because that is his lust for power and control and
he is
rule over humanity.
And he is fully willing to partner with individuals as long as it means that humanity as a whole has been stolen from and destroyed, because he hates the image of God in humans. That's right. And so he's all about the isolation of power amongst the few at the death and destruction of the many, right? Because he understands that. He understands somebody's got to win. So why not let the ones win that hate God? Why not let the ones win that will ultimately maybe, bow a knee to me? Or even if they won't bow a knee to me, they can bow a knee to themselves. I don't care. Humanity is dead. It's the same thing. Yeah, it's like, I don't care. And so that is why and we're pressing this point because of this. Ideas have consequences. Ideas matter, right? And
history matters.
History
too,
matters.
It's playing out. We're not in a bubble, in a vacuum. We're not isolated, disconnected from this arc of history and the things that you laid out and that we've been talking about.
And policy is the laying out of ideas, right? Like that's what we're trying to push back to for the future.
We want to go.
That's right. And so when you get caught up in identity politics, when you get caught up in issue voting, when you're not paying attention, selfish, really. It is very selfish. And when you're not paying attention to the past, history repeats itself. Like there's nothing new under the sun. History is always repeating itself because the enemy has no new tactics, because he doesn't have to have new tactics, because we keep buying into the same damn old tactics. Like you don't have to come up with anything new. And because we're inherently selfish people. And if we're not constantly loving the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and loving our neighbor as ourselves, and I'll keep going back to that because it is the first 2 commandments, because it is the most important commandments. If we're not doing that, we will become inherently selfish. And we will not pay attention to what are the policies being written and how do they support me and my family and my neighbor. How does it have my neighbor in mind as well? And so I think as we dive through cultural Marxism and as we look at the slow march through the institutions, we need to pay attention to these things. Like what, as Dustin's saying, like what seems to be more on the side of light and what seems to be more on the side of darkness. How did these things come about? Because it's not only a question of how did we arrive here, but it's not where we have arrived, but how did we arrive here? Right? I think when
where is it going?
And where is it going? Because it's going where it came from, right? From the formation of the foundation of it. And that is usually, if you're willing to step back and move backwards down the timeline, it's where you can find the goal. Because in the middle, they can deceive you. They can throw different trickery at you and get you to look at different things and not pay attention. But if you'll go back to the formation of it, you'll start to see what the overall goal is and where we're headed and what they're trying to get you to vote for now. I mean, they're literally trying to get you to vote these things in to stay into office.
And you can see in their own literature along the way the willingness to infiltrate under the guise of one thing, but with a different intent, and to manipulate and deceive along the way because the end justifies the means.
That's
and
right.
So just like their master Satan, they are willing to lie. The main primary weapon is the lie. And who better to...
Did God really say?
Exactly. But the control over the media and the influence of the media, and if you're caught up in the middle of it, then that's just an important thing to ask and consider. Okay, what is the truth, and who's telling the truth, and whose motive might be, to tell the truth, whose motive might be to lie, and I'm sure there are people that have come down in different places asking that question, but your own worldview will, go a long way to influencing how you answer that question too.
Absolutely. So if you haven't subscribed, we would like for you to. That'll help us out a lot. And we hope that you tune in to next week as we start to dive in to the long march through the institutions of cultural Marxism and how it has got us to where we are today.